The Israelis have to put up with rockets being fired on them every so often. And the Israelis can't fire back because these people put a bunch of small children beside rockets. Small children, yeah, next to the rocket launches, to where if the Israelis fire back, they're going to kill small children. And of course, the Israelis, if they do something like that against civilians, they're condemned by the whole world. The other side see we can do that and get away with it. All right, again, folks, if you want to say something, the floor is open. Anybody? I mean, but if you're scared of the topic, folk, I hope it doesn't show up in the face. I'm scared of it. This is a really, really super touchy issue. Extremely touchy issue. Again, I wish no one any ill, and if anyone wants to speak up, if you don't like what I'm saying, hey, I don't like what I'm saying. So that'd make two of us. If you know better or think you know better, the floor is open. All right. The book goes on to the Arab-Israeli dispute, which, again, is a lot of repetition of what was going on before. And at this point, I won't repeat it. There goes a special section to the Six-Day War. Here's the significance of the Six-Day War. I mean, it occurred, like I said, right as I was graduating from high school. But during the Six-Day War, Israel expanded its borders from the original 1948 borders. They took over three areas: the Golan Heights, the West Bank of the Jordan, and the Gaza Strip. Basically three, and you'll hear a lot of these in the news, because the Arabs demanded that the Israelis should pull their borders back to pre-1967 borders, before the Six-Day War. Here's why they need the Golan Heights. I mean, I was there once. From the Golan Heights, they could look out over and see all the military activity of Syria doing. So the Golan Heights was what separated Israel from Syria, and it gave them a vantage point to watch Assyria. So of course, today we have satellites to where they might not need the Golan Heights as much anymore. The West Bank, that was the area between the Jordan River and the rest of Israel, steep, moderately steep bank. West Bank, they took that because it would serve as a buffer between Israel and Jordan. Gaza Strip, same thing, would serve as a buffer between Israel and Egypt. So the Israelis have kept that land to this day. Oh yes, they also took the whole city of Jerusalem and then moved the capital from Tel Aviv, where it had been, to Jerusalem. Before this time, the Palestinians, the Arabs, had occupied Jerusalem, but the Israelis took the entire city. They greatly increased their boundaries. In fact, your book will show a map on page 877, the Golan Heights, again, an ideal place to overlook what Syria is doing, West Bank. And now, oh yes, in 1967, Israel also occupied the large Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai Peninsula is bigger than the whole state of Israel is itself. The Israelis gave that back in 1982 in return, hopefully, supposedly for peace. But peace has not been there. Now, as to the nearest thing that Israel came to peace was, in 1978, United States President Jimmy Carter called the President of Egypt, Menachem Begin, and, called Anwar Sadat. Anwar Sadat was the President of Egypt. Menachem Begin was the President of Israel. Called them together at Camp David, Maryland. You know, Camp David is a place where presidents go when they want to get away from it all for a while. And anyway, they have excellent offices. Anyway, these three men met, particularly Sadat and Begin, and worked out a peace treaty that was destined to last 30 years. 1978 actually lasted a bit more than 30 years. It appears to have fallen down with the overthrow of the Egyptian government a couple years ago. Yes?
Do you know those names?
I'll tell you what, don't worry about the name of Sadat and don't worry about the name of Begin. I'll tell you that, for those of you who are here. Now, Jimmy Carter, all right, for those of you who are here and listening, his name will be on the test. Yeah, but anyway, Sadat and Begin, don't worry about your names so much. Now, Anwar Sadat paid for it with his life. About 2 years after the peace treaty was signed, he was assassinated, gunned down. And the next president, Mubarak, was able to observe the treaty for a long time, and when he appeared to be about to break it, he was overthrown, and Egypt is right now in a state of chaos. But that's the nearest to come to peace, but for about 32 years, Israel left its border with Egypt largely undefended. The book goes on to talk about the PLO, Intifada. Don't worry about the name Intifada, but yeah, I do worry about the PLO. And Yasser Arafat, who conducted a lot of terrorism against Israel for a while. And even after he officially renounced terrorism, others, Palestinians, continued to do terrorist acts against Israel. All right. I've said quite a bit about this conflict in the last few lessons, so I'm going to move on, except to leave you with this thought. There's no end in sight. The conflict is still going on, and we have our Secretary of State from time to time going over there trying to work out a peace treaty. Nothing works out. The United States does not seem to be as eager to give help to Israel as they was during Truman's and Eisenhower's and Kennedy's and Johnson's administration, even Nixon. The United States just doesn't seem to be as keen on it, and if another war broke out, it's difficult to tell what the United States would do. It is believed, widely believed, that Israel has developed the atomic bomb.
Yeah,
What's that?
absolutely have an atomic bomb.
Well, okay. The last time I heard, they officially denied it.
Of course they
I mean, but then again, they have some of the smartest scientists in the world, and I don't know, I heard this one time. An MIT student put together an atomic bomb in his dorm room, and he said the parts for it can be bought from hardware stores, Ace Hardware, Home Depot, and Lowe's, places like that. The information is not found in any one book. You find this bit of information in this book, and go to that book and find that bit, and go to that book. It said the information is there, scattered in various books, that a person who's really smart can put one together, and he put one together in his dorm room. But he asked his name not be used because he's afraid some terrorist group might try to kidnap him. The atomic bomb, I want to remind you, is using 1945 technology. That far back. Again, does Israel have the atomic bomb? I strongly, strongly suspect so. Very strongly.
Question.
Yes.
I know we started with all the land stuff. Is it still, the whole fight is still over the boundaries?
Yeah, see, they were given a certain boundaries in 1948. Which in 1956 they expanded boundary. President Eisenhower ordered to go back to the pre-1967 boundaries, and Great Britain and France joined with Eisenhower. So they went back, but then in 1967 they said, we're not going to give up the land our troops took with their blood. And they refused to give it up to this day, except they did give up the Sinai Peninsula, which is a huge bit of territory, even though it's largely uninhabited. They did give up the Sinai. But a lot, but see, the part I'm getting at is the boundaries have changed. And the Arabs say, if you'll just let us have all we had before your 1967 war, we'll be happy.
Who has the
Some of us
Sinai
don't believe
now?
it. What's that?
Who has the Sinai now?
The Sinai, Egypt.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, if you go into more detail, the Suez Canal was destroyed in 1967 by Israeli gunfire. It sunk a whole bunch of ships. But with the help of the United States, by 1980 or so, many years later, the canal was reopened again. But for years, the canal was unusable. Nasser took it from Britain and France, who had built it, who had worked it. Nasser seized it. I got to say this about these people. The oil fields were actually, oil wells were actually dug by foreigners. And once the oil wells were dug and producing, the Arabs came in and said, this is our land, these wells are ours, and they took over. And that is why other countries are very, very rarely want to invest in the Arab world, because they know that the Arabs will come in and say it's our stuff and nationalize it. The Southeast Asian people don't do that. The Koreans, the South Koreans don't. The Japanese don't do that, but these people do. All right, I've got to quit. Iran. Iran was controlled, I'll just call him the Shah. Actually, there was more than one Shah. So the word Shah, but we know of him as a Shah. His family name was Pahlavi. There actually was two of them, father and son. But the Shah ruled Iran for maybe many, many years, I guess in the 30s or so years. Now, to give you some idea how unimportant this was when I was younger, in 1969, I took a course in recent American history, and we had a 750-page textbook, which I still have. I looked it up recently, I thought, did we ever talk about the Middle East? So this book had 750 pages of American history from 1900 to 1969. And nothing at all was said about the Arab world. Oh, that's how unimportant it was to us then. Now today, it's all of a sudden become very important. We just ignore it, we forgot about it. But I was aware at one point that the Shah had given deeds of land to some of his peasants, and your book mentions that. The economy improved somewhat. What the Shah tried to do was to secularize, westernize Iran, and bring Iran up to the modern world. He saw that the West was far ahead. He wrote, my people must develop Western attitudes, must develop Western concepts of freedom. And he was rebelled against. Now, in the process, I must mention, he tortured people who disagreed with him. And here's where we incurred hate. The United States became hated in that part of the world. The Shah himself was greatly hated, particularly late in his reign. And the United States was hated because we supported the Shah. The Shah was the best friend we had in that part of the world for many, many years. And we tried to tell him, hey, you can't conduct yourself this way toward your people. You must lighten up. You must give your people more rights. He said, I will as soon as they're ready. But like so many dictators, it's an old story about a tiger by the tail. If you have a tiger by the tail, you can't let go. He'll turn around and eat you. And you can't hold on, or he's going to throw you off and bang you around and turn around and eat you anyway. Everything you do is wrong. The Shah had a tiger by the tail. Eventually, the Shah was overthrown. Ayatollah Khomeini took over. Ayatollah Khomeini took over. The Shah was suffering from cancer, and he went to the United States to seek medical treatment. He eventually died of cancer. Khomeini was to govern Iran until the day he died, but to govern Iran for a good many years, and he undid the reforms of Shah, and he was determined to turn the clock back and turn Iran back into a Muslim state. In fact, the title Ayatollah is like our title of Reverend or Father. It's a religious title. In effect, Iran then suddenly became our enemy. Well, we tried to get him on our side. But shortly after Ayatollah Khomeini took over, more than 50 American hostages were taken prisoner and held in Iran for some 400 days. And this is the crisis known as a hostage crisis. Now, because the crisis occurred from 1979 to 1981, it's likely none of you remember it. I remember it pretty well because it began on November 4th, 1979. The next day, I hired him at Lockheed, did my first day of work. Actually, I hired him November 2nd. On November 4th, the hostages were taken. And on November 5th, I started work. And of course, all of Lockheed was all abuzz. Hey, this was something folk unheard of in history, not even Adolf Hitler do. They took American diplomats who had diplomatic immunity and held them as hostages, said, give us the Shah back and we'll release your captives. We said, we don't negotiate that way, and we refused to give the Shah back. So the hostages remained there for some 400 some days, and then when Reagan became president, on Reagan's inauguration day, the hostages were freed to kind of make Jimmy Carter look really bad. Jimmy Carter did make some attempt to free the hostages, but two of his air helicopters crashed in the desert, and he was forced to turn back. Now there is a rumor that nobody wants to believe that when the Russians and Chinese heard that we were going to release all the Russians and Chinese, sent a personal quick message to Jimmy Carter, turn your turn your helicopters, turn your airplanes around. Most of us don't believe that, but nevertheless, this story got told. Anyway, the hostages remained there until the day Ronald Reagan became president. And if you visit the Carter Library, he will talk extensively about how he stayed next to the phone, trying hard to secure the hostages' release, and realized they were going to be released on the day that he left office. Again, it was partly an attempt by these people to slap Jimmy Carter in the face. All right, I'm going to get back to Iran in a minute, but first we'll move on to Iran's neighbor, Iraq. Before I do, I'll pause and call roll. All right.